So welcome to this segment as we look at question number B9. So I want to give you the solution to B9 in the 5070 paper 2 2024 question paper there. So it says iron tablets needed for blood boosting contain the hydrated salt, that is iron 2 sulfate heptahydrate or 7 water. Elena wishes to produce crystals of this hydrate starting with a reaction of acid A and with excess insoluble solid S. All right, so that is what it did. Then A there tells you to say, name the identity of the acid A. Now, because the salt that was produced was iron sulfate or iron 2 sulfate, it simply means this sulfate is coming from the acid, and we know, of course, an inorganic acid that contains that is simply sulfuric acid. So therefore I can simply say dilute sulfuric acid. So that was the name of the acid that was actually used, and that is representing A there. Then it says that give the formula of two compounds that could represent solid S. Now remember, to make up such a soluble salt, you can simply use an acid and, as we know, that was A1. This is supposed to be now A Roman to give the formula. So they want us to give the formula. So you could either, when you are preparing a soluble salt, you could use either a metal, or you could use just a metal oxide or a metal hydroxide or a metal carbonate in this case. That is what you could have actually used in this case. So possibly what they could have actually used in this case could have actually been iron 2 oxide. But remember, the question was saying give the formula, so they just wanted us to give the formula. So therefore the formula will be iron 2 oxide is that one. So this is the correct way of you writing it. They just wanted the formula. Then the other one that I could have used is simply iron 2 carbonate. So how was that going to be? So the formula was going to be that, and this is simply iron 2 carbonate. So that could have actually been the solid substance, solid S. So it could have actually been that. Then B says that construct a balanced chemical equation for the reaction between acid A and any of the solids stated and any of the solids stated in 2. So why I'm not using iron is because this was a hydrate, so I wanted to produce some form of water that has actually been incorporated. All right, so we could actually react. One of the reaction, for example, if I pick up that, it would have been iron oxide plus the acid, which is simply sulfuric acid, and that produces, in this case, iron sulfate. So we are simply talking about iron 2 sulfate plus H2 plus H2O. So this is what we are talking about. Is this equation balanced? Iron 1. If you look at oxygen, there are 5. This side there are 5. Hydrogen 2. So that actually indicates that it is already, in this case, balanced. So that is the equation that you could have actually done there, or you could have actually reacted. Remember, this is in solid, that is in aqueous, that is also going to be in aqueous, and that is going to be in liquid form in case they wanted state simple. Suppose I was using iron 2 carbonate, then how was that going to be? It was going to be Fe, iron carbonate, which is in solid form, plus sulfuric acid, which is simply in aqueous. And if you're using a carbonate, you produce a salt, which is iron 2 sulfate, which is quite alright in aqueous. You are going to have carbon dioxide, which is a gas, and you are going to have your H2O, which is in liquid form. Again, we can check if this equation is actually balanced. 1 1, carbonate 1 1, oxygen is 7, this is 4 5 6 7 as well, hydrogen 2 hydrogen 2. So the equation again is self-balanced. So you could have either taken this one or you could have actually done that one. There's no problem. So any of the two you could have actually written them. That's what they wanted you to do. Then we can move on to C. It says in order to obtain a solution of iron 2 sulfate, the learner carries out filtration after the reaction of A and S. Explain why filtration is carried out at this stage. So why do we carry out filtration? Remember, in each case, if you look at the equation, water is actually produced, and the insoluble solid S was actually in excess. So meaning not all of it had actually reacted. Yeah, so what you can actually say there is that the reason is simply to remove the excess. So you want to remove the excess unreacted. So we can say the excess unreacted, solid, S, from the reaction mixture. So that's the idea. You want to remove the excess unreacted solid S because it has not reacted. Now that ensures that the remaining filtrate contains only a pure solution of dissolved iron 2 oxide. So you want to do that. All right, so let's move on to D, which is our last one there. It says crystallization is then used to obtain dry pure iron sulfate heptahydrate or 7-water crystals from the iron 2 sulfate solution. Then it says state the steps involved. So they want you to state the steps that are actually involved. So now the steps that are involved in that, what are the steps that you need? The steps that you need in order to obtain pure crystals of the hydrate. One, what you can simply do is that you can carry out evaporation. Now how do you do that? To carry out evaporation, you can simply heat the filtered iron 2 sulfate solution gently in an evaporating dish until we can simply say a saturated solution is obtained. All right, that's what you can do. Then step number 2, you need to cool. So cooling could be another step that you could have actually taken. Now what is involved when it comes to cooling? So what you want to do is to leave the saturated solution to cool slowly at room temperature so that more crystals form. So that's what you want to do. Then step number 3 that you can do after cooling is simply, now you can actually make a separation. So you can actually separate. So you can simply in that case, a separation, you filter the mixture to isolate the formed crystals, because you want to obtain the crystals in this case from the solution that you had. Or if you want filter the mixture to isolate the formed crystals from the main solution. So that is what you can do. Then lastly but not the least that you can simply do is simply drying. So you need to dry. Remember they taught us how to obtain dry. So you need to dry. Then of course you can simply say that the crystals are dried between filter paper in the sun or oven. So you can actually use that. So these are the steps that you could have taken. You evaporate, you cool, so that more crystals form, you separate, and eventually drying. So these are steps that you could have actually taken in order for you to obtain that. So the question, remember, was saying steps, and it was carrying 4 marks in this exam. So they wanted you to do something like that. Please watch out as we do one of the next question in our video series. Thank you so much for watching.